Howdy y'all, WereGamer here coming at you with another Prophecy tier list. So in our last video, we did the leaders and units for the game Prophecy. Today, we're going to be talking about the items and traits that you can equip to your units to improve your individual units with the items, improve your units and your leaders with the traits. We're going to start with the items, and we're going to seed the board talking about each item as I go, and the same with the traits. At the end of both the items and the traits, we will return to each of the tier lists, and we will break it down even further and potentially move around one or two pieces that I think I may have had incorrectly placed the first time, just based off initial thoughts, but once seeing it in the larger grouping, have since changed my mind and realized I think it belongs up here with these items or down here with these items, etc., and I will explain why when I go to move them at the end if needed. Okay, jumping in here, we're going to be starting with the Agile Trident. The Agile Trident allows you to hit one additional time. This is a great item when you have on-hit effect traits, such as Thunder, for example. Pairing them with a Hunter like Scotty with high attack speed, this item can be very powerful. I do find this to be a little bit more of a niche item, though, as it does have to go on specific characters. It's not a generalization item, and it also needs to be paired with specific traits. That being said, I believe this item to be somewhere around A+, because when you combine it with the correct things, it does find itself extremely useful on those on-hit effects, being able to deal out that much more damage, such as things like Bonfire Bow hitting twice on somebody is extremely well, you can't pair those two items, but I guess Thunder hitting with this item is a very powerful thing. Ambrosia. I found Ambrosia, which leveled up from 50% to 150% max health increase on this item. If you can put this on almost anyone, and it is useful. Obviously, it's more useful on tanks and people with higher health, but if you get any non-tank more stars than your tanks, then this item becomes that much more powerful on your non-tanks. A 5-star Hades, for example, can make great use of this item because that 5-star allows you to have so much more health on your characters compared to, say, a 1-star Khepri, that this item can be placed on anyone and can find its own use. So I find this item to be S. Ankh of the Earth. Ankh of the Earth is the item that allows, upon death, you revive with health going from 600 to 1800. This item is extremely powerful on pet characters, as it does proc on the pets, so every time a pet character dies, such as Opwash, his zombies revive as well. So this item on pet characters is S. I find this item on other characters not being pet characters to be somewhere around A, so we're going to find it's at home somewhere right here in the middle in the A+ tier, Ankh of the Earth. Arcane Whip. Arcane Whip being the item that when enemies are hit with your abilities are disarmed from 4 seconds to 12 seconds. This item is extremely niche in the fact that you need a character whose abilities hit multiple number of people, but the only issue with that is a lot of the times when the characters that can hit multiple people also apply some form of CC, such as with Kernanos turning them into the pigs, with Ymir freezing them. You tend to hit more people, but you also tend to have these exact same people apply CC that lasts for X amount of time, that unless you can get Arcane Whip leveled up, that 4-second timer turns into a 1 or 2 second timer because they're CC'd for those first few seconds, so this item can easily be wasted. So I tend to find this item to be A, and also Disarm being one of the least valuable CCs in the game, only because right now we're in a much more mage-heavy meta right now, where we're focusing on abilities more than we are on hit effects. If we were in a very hunter-heavy meta, this would be probably an A+ or an S item, but with us being in a mage meta, I believe Arcane Whip falls somewhere more in the A tier. Talking about Archmage Barrier, this item at the beginning of combat gives you a 600 up to 1800 health shield. Once again, an item that applies to almost every single character, just like Ambrosia. You can put this on anybody and not feel bad about it. The only thing about it is that that shield, I believe, works the same as Sanctuary, that as long as your shield is being hit and not your actual health bar, you are not gaining mana. So even though this is a wonderful item to put on anybody for the health, if you're wanting a character to gain mana quicker, this item will slow down that mana gain, causing the enemy team to get their ultimates or abilities off before you, which can be a detriment. So the fact this thing can be applied to anybody but has a detriment side to it, I find it to be pretty A tier. Atlantis Bow. Atlantis Bow just gives you base attack speed, 30% up to 90%. This item has its uses, especially if you're going for on-hit effects, such as Thunder or Ice, but it can only be used in very specific situations and actually find itself being very useful. And for that, I tend to find this item to be somewhere in B+. The fact that it has no special abilities, it doesn't apply any form of CC, all it is base attack speed. Avalanche Bow. This being the bow that every second you get 5, 10, or 15% additional attack speed. I tend to find this item in the exact same tier as Atlantis bow, as they do similar things, because it takes 6 seconds for first tier of this to reach first tier of this. I actually tend to prefer in this scenario I prefer Atlantis bow over Avalanche bow, but not so much more that I would put Avalanche bow in B. I tend to find them on a very similar scale, as if I put Avalanche bow on a hunter that I feel is going to stay alive for a long time, such as Jing Wei, you tend to get more use out of this one than you do out of Atlantis bow, whereas Atlantis bow on a hunter that can die very easily, such as, let's say, a Izanami, then I tend to find Atlantis bow to be better. Alright, Avalanche Claymore being the item that gives you physical damage every second, very similar to the Avalanche Bow. I tend to find this item to not be extremely useful because the characters that you want the high damage on are usually the assassins or the frontliners like Humbats who can die extremely easily, so you'd rather have base damage than you would building damage. So I tend to find Avalanche Claymore to be in B just because the characters it works on, such as the tanks, don't get that much use out of it, as the tanks have such low base damage anyway, that by the time this item is kicking and in full strength, it's not giving them, it's too late in the game for them to really be as big effect as they could be. Avalanche Staff does the exact same thing, but for magic. 7% magical damage up to 21% magical damage. The problem I have with this item is that so many ultimates or abilities in the game don't actually do magic damage. They just apply CC, such as Kernanos or Medusa. Neither of them can use this item basically at all because their ultimates don't do any damage. They just apply a very wide range of CC. And the characters that can use this item typically are ulting quicker, and this item is not getting off as much. Or their mana is so long that they only get off their ultimate one time in the game, so the rest of the time, or in the round, so the rest of this time, this item's having no use for them. So I tend to find this item also in B. Alright, Bewitched Buckler. This is the item that, upon using your ability, you gain a health shield, 300 up to 900. This item, once again, just like Archmage Barrier, I tend to find very useful on characters like Sobek, who are ulting very often, especially if he has a mana build item. The problem is, though, it is another shield, so while your shield is active, you are not gaining mana for being hit. But it does provide a wonderful shield for those people to stay alive a bit longer, so it does have its uses, so I tend to find this item in A right alongside its cohort, the Archmage Barrier. Bladed Web. Bladed Web being the item that now, after its recent changes, gives you attack speed, but it also, for each attack you hit, for 4 seconds, it gives the opponent you hit a 95% attack speed reduction. So basically, you're shutting this person's attack speeds off. In the early game, rounds 1 through 5, this item can single-handedly win you the first few rounds, as you are only fighting with 2 to 3 units. This item completely takes away a unit for such a long time that their DPS is dropping so much that if you have this item early in any decent comp, you're typically going to win with this item. But late game, it does tend to fall off. This is a wonderful item for characters like Arachne because the attack effect does affect with the babies. So for all those reasons, this item is above the point of balance. I tend to find it somewhere near A+ and S, but I'll put it in A+ because I don't believe it's up to the standards of Ambrosia. Bloodforge. Critical strikes grant a 300 health shield. This is a extremely niche item that requires you to crit, and once again, it gives you a shield. While shields are wonderful, not being able to gain mana while shielded is a detriment. So the fact that this is such a niche item that has a wonderful ability that also has a niche downside, I tend to find this to be one of the worst items in the game, and I very rarely find myself picking it up, even when I'm running characters like Loki, who I'm trying to crit with often. So I will put this item in C tier. Bonfire Bow. Doing 20 up to 60% of the max health to the enemy opponent, 30% chance on hit as magical damage. This is one of the best items in the game, especially on hunters or anybody with high attack speed. Obviously, this is the weapon of choice for Scotty, who is one of the highest attack speeds in the game, who is constantly firing those auto attacks from a safe distance. This item can be used in any game at any time. Even if it is not perfect for the character you have, this item will tend to be better than the item that your character is currently holding just because of the pure damage it has for output. So this is definitely an S tier item. Let's talk about the Boots of Freedom. Boots of Freedom give you CC immunity and health. The CC immunity and health is wonderful for those tanks who you are trying to make sure ult, such as a Geb. This is one of my favorite items to put on Geb. On King Arthur, as he has to be CC immune so that he can get his ability off and execute somebody. I love to put this item on Hunbats or even a Cabrakan so that Cabrakan can get his ult off. This is a wonderful item that I tend to put down almost every game if I see it. It is one of the better CC immune boots because the health, like again, is always useful. It is not a health shield, which is even better. So I tend to find this to be one of the best CC immune boots you can get, and it is definitely S tier. Champion Greatsword. Champion Greatsword is what I was talking about earlier. It just gives you pure flat damage, 45 up to 135. This is a great item to pair with fire or for characters with high base damage anyway, such as Daji or Izanami. I tend to find a swap for this item in almost every comp I put down. So for that reason and the pure power it gives you, I will put this in A+. Chunky Club, giving you life on hit, and that is basic attack hit, 80 up to 240, is very useful in the early game. Later in the game, it begins to fall off. Even the 240 for hit isn't as good as it feels like it should be in the late game, but this item can carry you very heavily through the early game, so I will put it in A tier. Cleaving Trident. Cleaving Trident attacks hit one additional enemy. This is wonderful as long as your auto attacks are not being pulled away to a character standing by themselves, such as a Daji in your backline, or if Loki teleports everyone to your backline and you're hitting a Khepri in the front line, he's the only one there. This item is very niche, and it has its uses, but it also has its detriments to it, and for that reason, I think I'll put it in B+ for the fact that it can be easily counterable with a nice spread out group on the enemy team. Divine Intervention saw some major changes here recently. However, at 30% health at all ranks, it gives you an attack speed 50 up to 150% for 4 seconds. The immunity for 4 seconds is the key here. This item is wonderful to keep you alive right at the end game and allow you to make that final push to hopefully burst everyone down. This item, before the rework, I would have put in S+ 100%. This was the best item in the game. With its changes, I have seen less of a carry from this item. This item is still extremely useful and can be put on almost anybody, and you see effectiveness out of it. Obviously, it has characters it is better on, but I tend to find this item somewhere between A+ and S. We're going to put it in S for now, but I do want to keep my eye on this item moving forwards. I do believe that over the weeks, we're going to see this item drop into A+, but for now, we're going to keep it conservatively in S, and we will see how it performs moving forwards. Divine Spear. Divine Sphere giving you base damage and ignore magical protections. This item is wonderful for characters you're trying to get to pop off and do tons of damage all at once. The only problem I have with this item is that it does not allow any utility to the characters that are using it. This is more of a single target magic damage item, which would be very well served on a character such as Kali, for example, who only hits 1 or 2 people, sometimes 3 with their ultimate. But on something like a Merlin who's hitting everybody, you typically want a on-hit effect of those abilities, such as, for example, the Arcane Whip disarming them. So for that reason, I tend to find this item somewhere near B+, and typically if I put it down, I'm happy with it, but I'm also looking to replace it with something better. Draining Blade, which is the item that allows you to burn mana from your opponent, 30 up to 90 on hit. This is another one of those items very similar to Bladed Web, that if you get it early in the game, you basically shut off one opponent's ability to use their abilities, which is huge in the early game. But again, late game, unless you have this on a high attack speed person, you're only hitting one person at a time, which is the detriment, and later in game, you want to make sure that your items and your abilities and effects and everything are trying to hit multiple people, or the one person you're hitting is so detrimental, like Bonfire Bow, that you're just destroying them. So for that reason, I find Draining Blade to be somewhere in the A tier, as in the early game, it's extremely powerful. Emperor's Vambrace, attacks made against you increase your physical damage by 10. This is a very similar item to the Avalanche and Claymore and Staff, where you're building up over time. I do find this item to be very useful on tanks that are going to be alive for a long time. But the problem with that is you're not really taking what they do and making it better. You're making their weakness okay. And for that reason, I tend to find this to be an item that I will lay down if I see it, but I'm looking to replace it later, and I will almost never take this item into the end game. For that reason, I'll put it in B+. Enchanted Blade. Enchanted Blade giving you 50% magical critical chance at all times and 50 up to 150% magical damage increase. This item I tend to lay down once again, but I'm looking to replace it. This item does work extremely well with 2 stacks of Astral, as you do have 100% critical strike chance with your abilities at that point. But when it comes to critical strikes, you're typically trying to get those more on your auto attacks than you are on your abilities, as your auto attacks are being fired so much more often. And once again, similar to the Avalanche Staff, you're only getting your set of abilities off typically 1 time, sometimes twice, with your hard-hitting mages in a round. And for that reason, I tend to find it in B+. Endless Thirst. Endless Thirst being the lifesteal item, giving you 70 up to 210% lifesteal. This is a great item paired with things such as Fire. If you can get Fire with increased lifesteal, then whatever character has that ability is typically healing so much that they are close to unkillable. But a problem with this item is, like I talked about in my Leaders and Units video, lifesteal is so prevalent in this game that it finds very difficult to put Endless Thirst onto somebody and not have them countered. And for that reason, I will also put this item in B+. Furious Axe. Furious Axe is the little brother to Bonfire Bow, as Furious Axe on hit does 6% up to 18% of the max health of your opponent as magical damage. It's the same thing almost as Bonfire Bow, except slightly weaker, and it also doesn't have a % chance of hitting. It hits every single time. So for this reason, I think it is the little brother of Bonfire Bow. It's going to go right below it in A+. Gauntlet of God. This item, giving you physical protection 70 up to 210, can be very powerful and allow you to live for a long time. Pairing this with things like metallic defense is a very strong combo. Anytime you get defense, it is valuable and can be placed on anybody. And for that reason, I find it to be A tier. Grand Feast. Grand Feast giving you 400 up to 1200 max health, depending on how high you level it. Once again, this is health, not a health shield. All our health shield items are an A. Straight health is better than a shield, and for that very obvious reason, Grand Feast goes up into A+. Guillotine Greaves. Guillotine Greaves being the CC immune boots that give you physical damage. These I believe to be the second best CC immune boots in the game compared to Boots of Freedom that give you health. But I do find the CC immunity so powerful that it has to go up into S tier. Now let's talk about Hades Hot Hands. Hades Hot Hands recently received a buff where 10%, 20%, 30% building up upon starring on damage taken, deal 300 true damage in an area. This item, upon reading it, sounds really good, but it doesn't sound incredible. It sounds like, oh, okay, that could work out really well. Until you put it on any character in the game, especially tanks, and you start seeing that true damage bar on the damage screen just go up and up and up and up. This item right now, I find to be broken. Absolutely broken. It is an S+. This item right here can win you a game. I believe that the way to fix this item is stop making it hit in an area and make it only do the true damage to the person who hit you. I still believe with that change, this item would be either S or A+, but that is much better than hitting in an area and affecting everybody. Alright, let's talk about Havoc Hammer. Havoc Hammer, with a % chance to stun the enemy for 2 seconds, is extremely powerful on things such as Arachne with those pets, as the pets do get that on-hit effect. This is a very strong item, but it's not an item that's typically going to carry you into the late game, as stuns are not as powerful as some other forms of CC. So I do believe this item is going to go into A. Impenetrable Plate gives you a % chance on damage taken to become immune for 3 seconds. This item will keep you alive. It'll keep you alive long enough typically to get your ultimate off, which is the main thing you're looking to do here, but it does not have an ongoing effect that's going to help you long term. You'll typically get this off once or twice in a fight, but that's it. So for that reason, I find it an A. Imperial Helmet just gives you critical immunity and max health, 200 up to 600. Health is a wonderful thing in this game. It gives you less health than Grand Feast, and being crit immune is not as powerful as more health, so this is going to go underneath Grand Feast into A tier. Legion Helm. When crit, gains 70% evasion for 3 seconds. Evasion is extremely powerful, but you're not getting crit near as often as you believe you are. You'll get this off sometime towards the beginning of the game when crit chance is typically higher. But other than that, I typically find this item not to be super powerful in a round, and for that reason, we'll put it in B+. Living Wand. On ability hit, gain life. This item is incredible on characters like Merlin, on Zhong Kui, on Hunbats, on Hades, who for each person you hit and each person you hit with your ability, as it ticks, you are increasing your life and you're becoming basically unkillable. But the problem is it only works extremely well on 5 or 6 characters in the game, and since it's so niche, we're going to put it in A. Alright, let's go to Lucky Wizard Hat. Lucky Wizard Hat giving you the opportunity to double cast 50 up to 100%, I believe it is. This is a wonderful item because it's basically an item of the trait Clarity. But with that being said, this only affects one person, and you have to get it on the right person. But also, that being said, it's weaker than Clarity, as you are having to take up your item slot, meaning, yes, you may double Merlin ultimate, but your Merlin's not applying an item, such as Arcane Whip, to disarm them with his ultimate, so it's less valuable. However, the ability to double cast your ability and get that much more DPS on the field is still very powerful, and I tend to find this item in A+. Magebane Brooch. This item giving you magical protections can be extremely powerful, and I tend to find this item very powerful in the early game, but typically looking to get rid of in the late game, as this does not affect the auto attacks. It only affects the abilities being hit on you, so it will keep people alive longer, but again, you typically want some on-hit effects from your items affecting the enemy team, so I tend to find this item in A+. Moving on to the Mega Mana Potion, I believe this item is extremely powerful on your mages who you're wanting to get your ultimate off, such as Agni and anything like that, or maybe even your Geb trying to get that off, or your Humbats, anything you're trying to get to ult as quick as possible to disrupt the enemy team or do damage to the enemy team. This is a very powerful item. I tend to find it in S. I'm always looking for this item. Narcissus Mirror, getting a nerf here recently. Damage reflection 40% up to 120% is still very powerful, but it's nowhere near as powerful as its counterpart used to be, which I would have put in S+. I tend to find this item somewhere in A+ now. Necrotic Broadsword. Necrotic Broadsword attacks reduce enemy healing by 100% for 4 seconds, plus physical damage. This is an item I'm typically trying to find. However, it only does this to one person, or the person you are hitting with your auto attacks. So for that reason, I'll put it in A+. Organ Obliterator, giving you 200% physical critical damage up to 600%. This is a very niche item that I typically only tend to look for when I'm playing Loki as my leader. For that reason, I'll put it in B. Piercing Pike is the exact same thing as Divine Spear, except for physical damage and auto attacks. And for that reason, we're going to put it in B+ with its counterpart. Polymorph Tome. Polymorph Tome giving you health and the chance when hit to polymorph the opponent hitting you. And I tend to find this item extremely powerful on pet comps, particularly on Arachnes and Allplashes who put down multiple pets at a time. And for that reason, I tend to find Polymorph somewhere in the A+ range, mostly because of the health that is adequated with it as well. Ring of the Magi, basically being a downgraded version of Spirit, the trait, is wonderful for building up, but I also tend to find it to be less useful than its other mana items that are in that family, so for that reason, we'll put it in A. Rod of Rot is one of the best items for people like Merlin, because this item, based on ability hit, reduces healing on the enemy team, and this item goes so well with so many mages being played right now that this is an item you're typically looking to put on one of those heavy area mages, so it's S tier. Rod of Booty, giving you 40% up to 120% magical damage. This is another one of those items that if I can't find the Rod of Rots, if I can't find the Mega Mana Potions, this is the item I will put down to take the place of those items on my mages, but I don't look for it in particularly, and for that reason I'll put it in A. Sanctified Saber. With auto attack hits, you are silencing one opponent. This is a very powerful ability to silence, but only one opponent at a time is not as powerful, so we'll put that in A. Scorching Scimitar, giving you % increased damage, is very powerful on characters like Daji, but your physical damage tends to be already too low because you have to get items to increase your physical damage a lot of the time, and for that reason, I tend not to find this item as useful as some of its counterparts, so we'll put that in B+. Scroll of Stifling does the same thing as Sanctified Saber, except on ability hits. So once again, just like Rod of Rot, this silences your enemies with ability hits. You're looking to get this on your Merlins, on your Agnis, on your Hades. So that is an S tier item. Shifting Cloak gives you evasion on a character, just straight and simple. This item is a wonderful first item to put down on somebody that you're trying to keep alive who does not have an item, but you're almost always looking to replace it. So for that reason, I'll put it in B+. Shrewd Baton, on auto attack hit, you are gaining extra mana. This is very similar to Resourceful, the trait. It's a downgraded version of that. I tend to always put this item on a character that has something like Silence Void as its traits, so that has a higher chance of using its abilities as quickly as possible. And for that reason, I'll put this into A+. Sorcerer Slippers. This is the CC immune boots that give you percent physical or percent magical damage. This item is the next tier down, I believe, in the CC immune boots, and because you're typically sacrificing something like a Scroll Stifling or a Rod of Rot to put this item down on your mages, just so that you get your CC immunity off, but you're also sacrificing the abilities that these items give you. For that reason, I think this is A+. Soul Cleaver. Soul Cleaver doing 30, 40, or 50% of the target's max health as magical damage on ability hit is one of the number one items you are trying to get on anybody who has a wide arching attack, such as Agni, Merlin, Geb, Hades, anybody like that, Humbats, anybody that can hit multiple people with their abilities. This is one of the best items in the games, and I believe is S+ right up here with Hades' Hot Hands. This is the number one item that if I have any mage on the field, I want this item. Spartan Guard, giving your character block. It is very similar to the evasion cloak, just giving you evasion. This one gives you block. I think it does very similar things. You're typically looking to replace it. We'll put that in B+. Stone of Gaia, healing your character for percent max health based on how high you upgrade it. It's very powerful on tanks, but healing typically tends to be worse than max health, so I prefer the health items. So for that reason, this will go into A. Okay. Sure Strike Ballista. Sure Strike Ballista giving you 20% attack speed and attacks cannot evade. Let's talk about all three of these Sure Strike items. Ballista gives you attack speed, Shanker gives you critical chance, and Slasher gives you physical damage. All three of these items are not wonderful items in their base stats. The thing that these items are used for is that they are good if you're running Fire against Loki, if you're running Haste against Loki, if you're running Thunder against Loki. With Loki, if you're running it against Evasion. All three of these items are in the game to counter Evasion. So if somebody has the Evasion trait, plus they have the Legion Helm, plus they have Shifting Cloak, they are evading so much that these items become necessary, but they are so niche that I very rarely find myself picking them up if I'm not playing against Evasion, that I will put them down here and see. I almost never look for these items unless I'm playing against Evasion. They are incredibly niche, and for them to be valuable outside of that niche aspect, they need some buffs to their current stats. Titan's Rampart. Titan's Rampart, making it to where you can only receive X amount of damage from a single source is very powerful, but a lot of times late game, you are taking damage from so many multiple sources that it does not matter how much damage you're taking from each source. So for that reason, I tend to put this in B. And Wing Sabatons being the last CC immune boots, this one granting you attack speed. I find it very similar to the Sorcerer Slippers, below health, below damage. We'll put this in A+. The CC immunity is still extremely powerful. And there you have it. There is your items tier list. Now, I said I would go back and look at it and see if there's anything that stands out to me that I might want to shift around or move. And upon first glance, I do see at least 2 items I think I do want to move around. 3, actually. 3 items I want to move around. Atlantis Bow giving you that base attack speed in comparison to an Avalanche Bow that has to build up. This item I do tend to prefer more than the Avalanche Bow, so we will bring it up into A tier. The other one is the Enchanted Blade, giving you percent damage. I do tend to put this item down much more often than I do some of the other items in B+, so I will put it into A. And Scorching Scimitar, I am arguing between A and B+, but the more I look at it, I do tend to pick it up more often than I do with these items down here. So I'll keep that item in B+. So there's your final items tier list right there, guys. So we're going to jump over here and we're going to do traits next. Okay, let's talk about traits. Ether being the trait that allows you to burn mana from your enemies. This tends to be one of the weaker traits, as late game, once again, you're only hitting one person at a time, burning their mana. I don't tend to find this to be a trait I picked up very often, so we'll put that into B+. Agility being the trait that gives you a chance to hit 2 additional times when attacking. It applies on-hit effects, which is very powerful with certain other traits. However, it does not tend to be a trait that I'm looking for on a consistent basis, so I will put this into A. Arcane being the trait that gives you percent true damage with on-hit effects from auto attacks. This is a very powerful item when you're combining it with things like fire and high damage, but it does require a very specific comp, so I tend to find this item in A, or this trait in A. Astral being the trait that gives you percent magical crit chance. This is a very niche item that tends to only work well on people like Poseidon or Zeus, and for that reason, since it only works on a couple of the leaders, well at least, I will put this into A. Block, being able to block out X amount of damage based on your level is a very powerful trait looking in the early game. More towards the late game, it tends to be less useful though, and for that reason, I tend to pick this item up less than some of the other ones, and for that reason, I will put it into B+ probably. Blood. Blood, you get a percent chance to reduce the enemy target's damage while increasing your own. This is one of my least picked up traits, mostly because it has such a niche effect that it's increasing your damage while decreasing theirs. One of the few leaders I tend to find this trait extremely powerful on tends to be someone like Thor or Thanatos, but it's also weaker than some of the more niche items and for that reason I'll put it in B. Clarity, giving you the percent chance to double cast. This trait has changed the game in such a way that it's actually blown my mind away a little bit. This trait, giving you the chance to double class and working on some characters the way they do, such as King Arthur, allowing him to double execute, has changed the way that this game is played. And the fact that this trait can completely change the way a game is played, this trait goes into S for sure. Defense, giving you defensive stats against physical damage is great to pair with things like metallic, or honestly just to have on its own to protect you. For that reason, I tend to find defensive traits typically to go into A+. Demon, providing you lifesteal. Lifesteal is one of the least useful stats in this game, as burst damage is the name of this game. Not continued damage from things such as hunters tends to be as powerful in this game, and for that reason, I tend to find Demon in B+. Actually in B. I put it down here with Blood for sure, because I will pick up Ether and Block way before I will Demon. Devotion, healing you based on ability hit. One, healing can be countered, and two, you don't want devotion on characters with long mana cooldowns, but it is so useful on so many characters with short cooldowns like Sobek and Allplush, for example, that this item has to shoot itself in A+. Disarm, with on-hit effects, disarming your opponents. This can be a lot more useful than some people believe it can be. Many people in this game would put this item down here, or this trait down here in D. I tend to find this extremely useful on pet characters or high attack speed characters. If I don't have the traits I necessarily want, I will happily put a disarm on a Scotty or a Kernanos, but I always will put a disarm on something like an Arachne or an Allplush with those babies. So this item I do tend to put in B+. Earth, giving you the chance to stun when hit. This is a very powerful item against Hunter comps, but once again, we are in a very heavy mage meta. So for that reason, Hunters being less valuable than mages right now, I will put this in a B+. Elite, after suffering crowd control effect, you gain damage reduction and magical reflect. This is extremely powerful when countering those mages such as Poseidon or Zeus, and for the simple fact that those characters are extremely powerful right now, I will put it into A. Endurance, giving you more maximum health. Health is extremely powerful in this game, and this is one of my favorite traits to pick up at almost any comp. Even if I can't get something like a Molten or a Sanctuary to go with it, I will get some endurance to go by itself, and for that reason, it has to go in A+. Evasion, basically giving you evasion against hits is extremely powerful. Even just 2 evasion can be very powerful in keeping yourself alive and frustrating the enemy team as they are not gaining mana because they're not hitting you. For this reason, that goes into A+. Fire giving you percent increased attack damage is very powerful. But it only works well on certain characters. You can waste so many of your fires trying to get it to 4 or 6 on your characters that so many of them go to waste that you could be putting down other traits, that I tend to find fire to be so niche that you never want more than 2 usually unless you're running a straight fire comp. But when used correctly, it's very powerful, so we will put it into A. Force. Force giving you increased physical critical damage. This is Loki's weapon of choice. Outside of Loki and sometimes Susanoo, though, not extremely powerful. And without luck, it's almost worthless. For that reason, I put it in B. Haste, giving you increased attack speed. Increased attack speed to increase your on-hit effects from items or just pump out more damage is always very powerful. For that very simple reason, I will put it in A+. And it can be used by almost anybody. Attack speed is useful on almost anybody. Ice, having the chance to stun your opponent is one of the best, or freeze your opponent is one of the best abilities I've found in this game to completely stop opponents from moving. You can turn a 1v1 with ice almost immediately and just win the round. So I find ice to be one of the #1 traits I pick up. It will go into A+. Intelligence, giving you increased percent magical damage. I love having this trait on so many multiple mages, with us being in such a mage-heavy comp, that I do find this trait typically finds itself somewhere around A+. Isolation, giving your characters more protections, both physical and magical, when they are isolated on the field. That's the problem I have with this item, is I typically don't want so much isolation spread across my field, because you have to separate people from your leader, and a lot of the time you want your leader surrounded by people. For that simple reason, I will put this item into B+. Judgment, percent chance to cause chain lightning damage, very similar to Odysseus Bow and Smite. That's what this will affect. It does apply on hit effects. If this trait did not apply on hit effects, I would put it in C. But with it applying on hit effects, I think I will move it up into B+. Light Singer rework, to where now it applies 50, 75, and 100% CC immunity, but you have to be able to get them on board. I do find this trait still extremely useful in countering CC, especially if you can get heavy light. But because it is nowhere near as powerful as it used to be, the S+ trait, I do see myself picking it up a lot less now. I will throw it into A+ for now, but I would like to watch this trait. I do believe that we will see this trait fall into A tier soon, but for now we'll put it in A+. Luck, giving you increased crit chance, is very powerful, especially when paired with things like Force and Haste, but it has a very niche usage, and for that reason I'll put it in B+. Metallic, giving you increased damage based on your protections, can be very powerful when you consider the different protection traits and items we have in this game, including the extra protections that so many characters seem to have in this game. I do love seeing Metallic, but you have to combo it. Metallic is not something that works well on its own. It has to have a combo with it. For that reason, you want Metallic in A. Molten, doing the exact same thing as Metallic, but with max health. Again, needs a combo, does the same thing. We find Molten in A. Opportunist, gain increased damage against CC targets, which is extremely powerful. This item used to be the item of choice on Poseidon before Poseidon got a bug fix. Opportunist, I tend to only pick up if I have a very CC heavy comp, and I know CC items and traits are not being picked up as prevalent. For that reason, they can be countered very easily, I feel like. I will put Opportunist into A. Perception, giving you damage reduction based off your mana. That is very powerful when you're near max mana, but every time you use your ability, your mana goes back down to 0, causing this item to be very, very difficult to have at the right times. This is a wonderful item to counter silence. It is the perfect counter to silence, because your opponent silences you, you're sitting at max mana, not able to use your ability, but you're getting all this damage reduction. But Perception is a counter trait, so I will put that into B+. Poison, doing damage over time and shutting down healing. Shutting down healing is a very powerful trait, but the damage is not enough, and it only hits one person at a time, and for that very simple reason, Poison goes into A. Resolve, doing the same thing as defense, except giving you magical protections, not physical protections. I believe these things are very side by side, so we will put Resolve into A+. Resourceful, giving you extra mana on attack hit, is very powerful in getting your abilities off. This item, or this trait, absolutely goes into S. Runic, giving you increased crowd control duration. This is a wonderful trait if you have a full crowd control team, but it tends to also be the trait that I pick up the absolute least. I will completely avoid Runic if I can, because it does not apply anything so powerful that the opponents don't have a counter to it, or they can just ignore it. And for that very simple reason, it's going into C. Sanctuary, giving you a shield on top of your max health. Now, once again, just like we talked about in items, shields are extremely powerful in keeping you alive, but you do not gain mana from being hit with your shield, and that can be a very large detriment to your damage output. So that reason, it goes into A. Silence, abilities being able to silence your opponents is one of the best abilities you can have in the game, as you completely shut off the opponent from using their abilities, and they are nothing but auto attackers at that point. So silence is absolutely one of the best traits in the game. It goes into S. Spirit, giving you X mana per second to be able to get your abilities off more, is very powerful, but Resourceful tends to be more powerful, so Spirit will go into A+. Thunder, doing X amount damage to an opponent on attack hit. This is very strong on hunters such as Scotty, or on pets such as Arachne. This item, however, tends to be a lot weaker than some of its counterparts, but I will put it into A+. Vigor, giving you healing based off damage taken, is very powerful, and if you can avoid anti-heal, Vigor can carry you into the late game, but it can be countered very easily, so I do find it in A. Void, being very similar to Silence and hitting X amount of people, can be very powerful. And it also does a lot of damage over time while stopping healing. And the fact that it has so many utility traits, Void is one of the first traits people look for when they load up their game. Void has to go into S tier. Wild, doing a very similar thing to Vigor in healing you, but it does it based off max health. If you can get a Wild with an Endurance, for example, and some health items, this is a wonderful item to get, especially if you can pair like Wild, Molten Endurance. That's a very powerful combo, but Wild in itself can be countered, and the healing is not extremely insane, so it will go into A. Wisdom, giving you mana to start the round. I believe it's 30, 45, and 60 mana at start of combat. This item allowing you to more than likely be the character that ults first in the game. Pairing that with something like a Silence or a Void or even a Clarity can be so powerful that it has to find itself into S tier. Guys, that is the traits. If you notice something across this trait board here, there's one common theme. All the best traits in the game focus on mages right now. We are in a mage meta. All of the top traits are centered around mages or abilities even. I won't even say mages, but abilities. Abilities getting off in a wide range across the board is the main thing you're looking for in this game. So guys, there's my traits. There's my item tier list. There's my traits tier list. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you agree with me, disagree with me, explain why. If you think one thing belongs in another tier and something else is either better or worse, whatever, don't just tell me. Tell me why. Let's talk about it in the comments down below. I will be responding to every comment. I would love to talk to you guys and hear your thoughts about it. If you enjoyed the video, whether you agree with me or not, but if you just want to support me, be sure to hit that thumbs up button, hit that like button. It helps me so much. And subscribe and hit that bell so that you never miss another video. Be sure to go check out my Leaders and Units video I did the other day if you enjoyed this one. And I will be redoing these tier list videos periodically as the meta changes. So stick around for that. Go check out all my other videos. Catch me live on twitch.tv/TheWereGamer so that you can come hang out with us and join the community. But guys, thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Bye!